Rumors are circulating that a known MMORPG developer based in South Korea may be working on an MMO game set in the Horizon universe. The studio named in the agreement with Sony has a long history of developing MMORPGs. Sony has been rumored to expand some of its first-party franchises into live-service multiplayer games. The Horizon franchise has been rumored to be getting one of these games, often aligned with something along the lines of a Monster Hunter-style game. Now, a potential partnership between Sony and a Korean MMORPG developer is offering a new angle in the Horizon multiplayer game conversation. Korean website MTN has spoken to sources within developer NSoft, claiming that the studio has entered a partnership with Sony to develop an MMORPG game in the Horizon universe. It is said that Sony and NSoft reached an agreement on November 8 and the developer is recruiting staff to work on Project H in job listings. Sony has neither confirmed nor denied the existence of this partnership. NSoft's catalog mostly consists of MMORPGs in a variety of styles and includes the Lineage series and Guild Wars 2. NSoft is reportedly pulling staff from various projects in pre-production moves to begin development on Project H. VGC also corroborates the reports from MTN and found a job listing for a senior social systems designer. With this partnership newly agreed upon, official news of this game may be months or years down the line. The conversation about Sony developing more multiplayer live-service games has picked up steam in the months after it purchased Destiny 2 developer Bungie. Bungie is also rumored to be reviving Marathon as an escape from Tarkov survival shooter. Sony has The Last of Us Factions game from Naughty Dog nearing completion and a recently announced online co-op game being developed by PlayStation London studio as well. With reports that Sony could be looking to launch up to 10 live-service games by 2026, the roster of potential titles is beginning to fill out. A multiplayer Horizon game can be inspired by that universe's pre- or post-apocalyptic setting. Though the outcome of the Pharaoh Plague is a losing war, players still may partake in massive battles against the machine horde. The franchise's post-apocalyptic setting could also be used in a way that could see players live in the world during the derangement and the Red Raids and flesh out some story elements that are only referenced in Horizon Zero Dawn and Horizon Forbidden West. Check out my previous video on the other multiplayer project from the Horizon universe. In a new press release, Remedy Entertainment officially reveals that the previous codename Heron project is a full-blown sequel to Control. The studio as a whole has a lot on its plate after announcing a slew of projects at the 505 showcase back in May and the reveal of Alan Wake 2 at the Game Awards in 2021. Following the great reception to Control, many fans were wondering which direction the studio would go in, as it has a number of franchises that fans were hoping to see get another entry. With so many projects in varying stages of development, Remedy hasn't gone into specifics about each one, only assigning a codename to them for now. In addition to Alan Wake 2, Remedy's other revealed games include Max Payne remakes with Rockstar, a live service title codename Vanguard being co-published with Tencent, and codename Condor, which is a proof-of-concept multiplayer spin-off of Control. The final project named codename Heron is where most speculation remained, as Remedy teased it as a bigger Control-related game. Thanks to a new press release, the studio essentially confirmed what many fans were expecting to hear about codename Heron and Remedy's confirmed connected universe. Essentially, this is a direct sequel to Control 2, and Remedy announced a co-development and co-publishing agreement with 505 Games. The deal has a budget of €50 million with full 50-50 split on revenue, with Remedy retaining the rights to the IP. Remedy will also handle publishing duties for the PC, while 505 takes care of console publishing. While the deal announcement and confirmation of a Control sequel is no doubt exciting, Remedy wanted to set expectations and made sure to let fans know that the game is still a while away from release. Control franchise game director Michael Kazuranen admitted that, "It'll take a while, but to put it mildly, this is the most exciting project I've ever worked on. It's still early days, but it will be worth the wait." Co-COS of 505 Games also put out their own statement regarding the deal, expressing excitement over what's to come. Control is the biggest investment 505 Games has ever made, so it has a special place in our hearts. We are grateful to the whole player community that has made Control such a long-lasting and loved game, and are even more excited to bring out Control 2. The long wait shouldn't be too surprising for fans, as Alan Wake 2 is clearly the furthest along in terms of development. Last month, Remedy confirmed that Alan Wake 2 is deep in the full production phase, even though there's still a lot of work remaining. The Max Payne collaboration is also still in production, though both Control projects are much further off, with both being in the concept stage. However, with the added development support from 505, it's possible Control 2's development cycle will now accelerate. A lot of details have surfaced recently regarding Final Fantasy XVI per interviews with its director and producer, but the latest comes from a surprise PS5 trailer. Sony recently released a video called PlayStation 5, Play Like Never Before, that highlights several of its features in games such as God of War Ragnarok and Final Fantasy XVI. Many eagle-eyed fans notice that the fine print, so to speak, of Final Fantasy XVI's presence reveals an important, new detail regarding its timed exclusivity. Indeed, fans have known Final Fantasy XVI was a timed PS5 exclusive since it was announced, but for how long hasn't previously been revealed. Many figured it would be quite some time, as Final Fantasy VII Remake was a PlayStation exclusive for a year, and even once that ended, it has only come to PC so far. Either way, fans should know that Final Fantasy XVI's timed exclusivity period will be shorter than FF7R, with the trailer stating that it is exclusive for the first 6 months of its launch. Of course, this doesn't mean fans should expect Final Fantasy XVI to come to Xbox as soon as this period ends. It's likely to make the jump to PC as soon as it can, but as FF7R is still not available on Xbox, it's highly unlikely that the platform is a high priority for Square. This information is certainly helpful for fans, but it should also be noted that the trailer notes that it's anticipated for summer 2023. The word choice here is no doubt deliberate. Per a recent interview involving Yoshi P, Final Fantasy XVI could release before summer 2023. He also thinks Square Enix will be able to release a confirmed release date before the end of the year. Other recently revealed details include an upcoming playable demo, new game plus and multiple difficulty options at launch, and more. Naughty Dog is working on a new AAA game alongside PlayStation Studios' Visual Arts, sending fans into speculation over what this title may be. Naughty Dog is one of the most well-known developers of PlayStation exclusive games, having created both the successful Uncharted and The Last of Us franchises. Considering Naughty Dog's reputation, it isn't necessarily surprising that many gamers are anticipating what's going to come next from the studio. Whether it be a continuation of Ellie's story in a sequel to The Last of Us Part 2, another Uncharted game, or something else entirely. Now, thanks to a new job listing spotted by Push Square, fans may have a bit more of an idea about what Naughty Dog is currently working on. The job listing is for a senior producer working as part of PSS Visual Arts, a production group that some may be familiar with due to its work on The Last of Us Part 1. According to the listing, the prospective employee at PlayStation will be working on a high-visibility project in a collaboration between Naughty Dog and PSS Visual Arts. This project doesn't have a name yet, but the listing states it has a clear vision and plan to release. A lot of gamers would like to see something new from the studio, such as the sci-fi game that's reported to be in development, or even a return to Uncharted for Naughty Dog, something that the developer has said it is also interested in. On paper, of all the possibilities, a new Jak and Daxter project seems one of the most likely options. The Jak and Daxter series was a huge part of the gaming landscape during the 2000s. The platforming antics of the duo paved the way for the likes of Ratchet and Clank after them, but, with no new releases since 2009, an appearance from the unlikely pairing is now long overdue. The first game in the series, Jak and Daxter: The Precursor Legacy, was released in 2001 for PS2. The bright, vibrant platformer was extremely similar to other games in the genre at that time, including the Nintendo 64's Super Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie. Players control Jak as he attempts to help his friend Daxter, who has been transformed into an Ottsel, which is a fictional hybrid of an otter and a weasel. While making their way around large, open environments, players will collect various objects and navigate tricky platforming sections, occasionally interacting with colorful NPCs and fighting enemies. The game's sequel, Jak 2, arrived 2 years later, then the third entry came the following year in 2004. Despite the fact that both Jak 2 and 3 garnered similarly high critical scores, the tone of both games had changed dramatically from the first, with the games having a much darker tone throughout. The groundbreaking Grand Theft Auto 3 clearly had an influence on Jak 2 and its overall tone and structure, which then continued into the third game. Thanks to the robust gameplay and highly polished overall presentation though, this tone was welcomed, and critics agreed that the series featured some of the strongest games on the PS2 platform. A couple more games followed. Jak X Combat Racing was a vehicular combat racer, differing dramatically from previous outings. Then came Daxter, a PSP exclusive that focused solely on Jak's wisecracking sidekick, and is considered by some to be one of the PSP's best games. The final Jak and Daxter outing came in 2009 with Jak and Daxter The Lost Frontier, which was seen as another strong entry, even if a little of the series' charm had seemingly worn off by then. Over the past 13 years, fans have been treated to a couple of remastered collections of the trilogy, but nothing else. The stage is set for a new Jak and Daxter game. The recent success of the PS5 exclusive Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart has shown that there is still a huge appetite for platforming action combat games, and Jak and Daxter certainly fit this mold. With so much of Naughty Dog's time now taken up with the Last of Us projects, not to mention a possible new entry in the Uncharted series being overdue. For the developer to collaborate with this new studio on a Jak and Daxter project makes perfect logistical sense. Time will tell if this proves to be the case, but for now, fans will continue to speculate. Speaking of Naughty Dog, a tabletop adaptation of the grim world in The Last of Us is making its way to Kickstarter. Since the great success of the original The Last of Us game, the franchise has blossomed into a multimedia franchise, and a new board game looks to be the next attempt to reach some new fans. First launched in 2013, the original game would see a remaster released the following year, as well as a sequel, The Last of Us Part 2, in 2020. A remake of the original game was released on modern consoles in September of this year. Soon after the first game's release, Dark Horse Comics ran a 4-part miniseries, expanding on main character Ellie's story. And the franchise has now gone to television with the upcoming The Last of Us TV show from HBO. Now Naughty Dog and Sony look to be testing some new waters, bringing to fans an analog version of its dark and tragic world. Themeborn Games have announced a Kickstarter campaign for The Last of Us Escape the Dark that went live on November 8th. The developer is best known for previous Escape the Dark games, which feature grim worlds, simple but significant gameplay, and a black and white aesthetic. The Last of Us Escape from the Dark looks to be staying true to these traditions. Themeborn also has a theme-first design mindset, and it assures fans it will do justice to the world and expansive story in the Last of Us franchise. Themeborn describes the game as a cooperative experience in which 1 to 5 players take on the role of characters from the video games, including Ellie, Joel, Tess, Bill, Tommy, or Marlene. They emphasize players' ability to tell their own unique stories while exploring an open-world map. Image shows the game in a striking black and white design with several sets of dice, location cards, and character cards for Joel and Ellie with what appear to be inventory slots. Back in 2020, an upcoming Last of Us board game published by CMON was announced. CMON has published many board games including tabletop adaptations of Horizon, Bloodborne and God of War. But the only information currently available on the company's website is its original announcement. With so little news, some fans are left wondering if the two games have anything to do with each other, or if rights to the board game have changed hands. Tabletop adaptations of popular video games are becoming more prominent these days. But the high expectations of passionate fans demand that developers stay true to the tone and story of the game they love. With Themeborn's track record of gritty survivalist games, however, it may indeed be up for the challenge. Speaking of The Last of Us, new information hints at The Last of Us multiplayer project being a free-to-play game. The PS3 and PS4 versions of The Last of Us came with a multiplayer game mode called Factions that featured many elements from its single-player story. Factions had a big emphasis on stealth, and players could also use materials to upgrade their armor and weapons. On the other hand, The Last of Us Part 2 did not ship with any multiplayer mode when it came out in 2020. Naughty Dog confirmed that it's working on a multiplayer game set in the Last of Us universe, but did not share any concrete news. At the Summer Game Fest, Naughty Dog announced a standalone multiplayer experience in the world of The Last of Us, with more details to come next year. Now, new information has surfaced which may reveal more about this upcoming project. As spotted by Insider Gaming, a job listing on the official Naughty Dog website hints that The Last of Us multiplayer game is a free-to-play title. The listing is for a producer position, and fans can check the bonus skills section at the bottom for the relevant information. It seems that Naughty Dog is looking for someone having proven experience in a production role for a AAA free-to-play game, which may reveal the nature of this upcoming multiplayer project. A leak from earlier this year suggested that The Last of Us multiplayer game will include a Battle Royale mode, which also seems to convey its free-to-play roots. Ultimately, fans will have to wait for Naughty Dog to reveal full details on this game. The former Epic Games senior systems designer Anders Howard has recently announced that he will be joining Naughty Dog. Howard has joined the studio as its principal monetization designer, being one of a couple of developers to be recently hired by Naughty Dog. According to information available on Howard's LinkedIn page, he has worked with a few high-profile studios and helped to ship several games for nearly 2 decades. Including his experience at Epic Games, where he designed many of the core systems found in Fortnite's Save the World, and later, Fortnite's Battle Royale mode. Howard helped to build the foundation for progression strategies in Fortnite's Battle Pass, proceeding to ship a further 12 Battle Passes for the game, while also being involved with Battle Pass integrations in Rocket League and Fall Guys. A recent post from Anders Howard's Twitter account shows an image of him standing next to Naughty Dog's logo following a previous tweet at the end of October which announced his joining of the studio. An update to his LinkedIn page confirmed his role as principal monetization designer for the studio, along with text that reads, "New adventures await." While Howard hasn't provided any details as to what he'll be working on now, many fans of Naughty Dog's games have taken this as a sign that he'll be involved with the development of the studio's first standalone multiplayer title. The possibility of an expert Battle Pass designer such as Howard working on the game has sparked plenty of speculation among fans, however. Howard's recent employment by Naughty Dog, along with the studio's recent search for a live ops producer with preferably some experience in developing free-to-play titles, has given fans solid reason to suspect the future multiplayer game of being a free-to-play title. Though these are all still just unconfirmed rumors circulating throughout the community, many believe that Howard's expertise will be put to use in bringing Battle Pass and other monetization systems to the future title to support it as a potentially free-to-play game. If the game is free-to-play, then expansions with new maps, gear, cosmetics, narratives, characters, or other such content could be added with an indefinite timeline for the future. The Last of Us future installments could further impact content in the multiplayer game through tie-in collaborations within the IP, for example. And new NPCs could be added depending on how inspired its story beats are. Purchasing additional, optional content should always be a decision left to players. And these purchases would be better off not impacting gameplay in order to make everyone's experiences the same in The Last of Us multiplayer game. Days Gone echoed The Walking Dead fairly closely in terms of how characters belonged to affiliate encampments, whose ideologies are typically stark to one another or where different people are represented in contrast to the protagonist. Days Gone's Deacon St. John is a nomad, able to move between encampments and mingle somewhat amicably with a diverse cast of characters for his own needs. Encampments like Copeland's, Tucker's, or Iron Mike's have comparable vendors, such as kitchens, merchants, bounties, and mechanics. Here, players are able to safely refuel and repair before heading back out into Freaker or Ripper territory. Interactions with characters in these encampments is commonly how the narrative in Days Gone is progressed. But even if players are simply stopping by on their way to another destination to purchase a new firearm, trade wolf meat or Freaker ears for currency, or repair damages to Deke's motorcycle, Deacon will chat with those around him. This lays the foundation for an immersive social dynamic between the player and the encampments they travel to, as well as the eccentric NPCs they may find there. Days Gone's design was largely imperfect, but if The Last of Us multiplayer game attempts a similar structure to hub camps with social dynamics, it should definitely look to it for influence. The Last of Us single-player games already established this sort of encampment dynamic in towns like Boston or Jackson, let alone the highly fortified and bountifully supplied Seattle Stadium. If players imagine these locations with a blend of NPCs and other players, they could behave similarly in a multiplayer atmosphere. The Last of Us could allow players to trade in materials for a currency, letting them feel as though they were contributing to particular features in the camp as a result, especially if contributions were publicly displayed. The Last of Us could thrive in this environment, and would be able to excel at crafting an exciting narrative as Naughty Dog did with The Last of Us Part 1 and The Last of Us Part 2. Days Gone makes Deacon a drifter bouncing back and forth between camps for a lot of the game. But The Last of Us multiplayer game could have players build themselves a home in an encampment and truly get to know the NPCs that they struggle to survive alongside. Likewise, it would be incredible if players could aid in defending their camps from players who come from another camp and attempt to raid them. In The Last of Us, players are met with a dystopian world where a fungal pandemic has turned much of the population into zombie-like monsters that crave flesh. These infected are mostly blind, but their hearing has vastly improved, and they pursue their prey with little regard for their safety. Runners have recently been infected, and while they still have their vision, the fungus has already begun invading their brains. Clickers are blind and rely on their hearing. Players should try everything in their power to prevent these terrifying creatures from coming close because they are awfully deadly. Stalkers are fast like runners, and they like to get their enemies by surprise. As the infection advances, some infected turn into bloaters. These creatures are huge, and they are covered in a thick layer of fungus that acts as armor. They can also rip sacks of mycotoxins from their bodies and hurl them at enemies. The Last of Us Part 2 introduces a new type of infected, the Shambler. These infected are quite similar to the bloaters, though they lack protective fungus, which makes them more vulnerable to regular bullets. In The Last of Us Part 2, players come across the Rat King, which is a unique variation of the infected. The terrifying creature is found in the lower levels of a hospital in Seattle. Strictly speaking, it is not a single organism. Instead, it is a combination of several infected who quarantined together and eventually fused into a monster of pure horror. Facing the Rat King is one of the scariest and the most fun moments of the entire game. The behemoth doesn't go down easy, and as players chip away at it, some infected that are part of the mass break free, and players also have to deal with these monsters. Flamethrowers, shotguns, and Molotovs are necessary to defeat this multi-stage enemy. One way the studio can ensure the game is a phenomenal experience is by pitting players against the best enemies. Most players are already predicting PvP battles involving factions warring against each other. There will probably be plenty of that, and will probably be just as exhilarating as it was in The Last of Us factions. However, the upcoming multiplayer game can knock its gameplay out of the park by featuring infected enemies like the Rat King. With players working as a team, it would be a blast to take down massive enemies that have different stages and incorporate other types of infected. Although the Rat King was created in unique conditions, there could have been other situations in The Last of Us world that has led to other Rat King-like abominations. HBO announced the January 2023 release date for their newest adaptation series The Last of Us. Ever since its original announcement back in 2020, fans of the beloved video game have been patiently waiting for this series to hit the popular streaming platform. For those who need a memory refresher, there is still enough time to play the game before the series starts streaming. When it comes to HBO, it's safe to say viewers have high expectations of The Last of Us series. It's been 9 years and 2 consoles later since The Last of Us game took the horror video game world by storm. The award-winning video game was nominated for 9 awards and won 4 of them, leaving fans wanting more of the popular duo Joel and Ellie. Fans eventually got what they wanted when Part 2 was released in 2020, with more villains, intense horde fights, and more of Joel and Ellie. The Last of Us will release on HBO and HBO Max on January 15, 2023. With the popularity of The Last of Us, of course, some A-list actors jumped on board at the chance to play some iconic characters. It seems as Pedro Pascal is becoming television's most adored single father, as audiences will see him follow a darker path to get Ellie to safety. Bella Ramsey is no stranger to HBO, as she once played Lyanna Mormont on Game of Thrones, where she captured the hearts of many. And it will be exciting to finally see Ramsey star in this new horror series. Another exciting A-lister is Nick Offerman, who will be playing the helpful Bill. Offerman has played various roles, some of which were serious while others were either villainous or comedic. This ensemble of characters is expected to deliver an enjoyable viewing experience. In addition to fun and gruesome gameplay, The Last of Us brought a compelling story along with it. This combination makes playing something worthwhile. After the game is all said and done, it makes fans think, "I wonder what will happen next." It seems like more and more video games are following this style, and developers are finally realizing that all gamers want is to care about their characters. Well, it's also possible that developers also see the adaptation opportunities that come along with creating a compelling storyline. Nonetheless, gamers are still getting what they want out of their experience. Well, Guess it's time to get out the PS5 remastered version of The Last of Us and get a little refresher before the series premieres. It's about time that we can finally rest easy knowing that The Last of Us finally has a release date and that it's just right around the corner. The Google Stadia streaming service is officially shutting down, and while users will be getting refunded for their purchases, they will be losing access to their games. The writing has been on the wall for Google Stadia for some time, with rumors cropping up a few months ago that the service was looking to shut down. The official Stadia social media came out to deny those claims, but now it's officially happening. The bad news is that Google Stadia users will be losing access to the games and DLC that they've purchased through the service or claimed through Stadia's free games program. The good news is that Google will at least be refunding Stadia users for all their purchases made through the Google Store, with most of those refunds expected to be finalized by mid-January 2023. That will coincide with the service's shutdown date, as Google has confirmed that Stadia will be shutting down on January 18, 2023. The Stadia technology will still be used by Google, with the technology set to be implemented across YouTube, Google Play, and augmented reality projects. Google also plans on making Stadia technology available to other gaming companies. Many employees who have been working with the Stadia team will be relocated to other departments at Google. Google Stadia's online store has already been shut down, following the recent announcement that the service would no longer be available at the start of next year. Accessible on PC, Android TVs, Chromecast Ultra, and other devices running Chrome OS, Google Stadia is a cloud gaming service that allowed users to stream AAA titles such as Red Dead Redemption 2, Destiny 2, and Far Cry 6. It was just 2 years ago that Stadia announced the actualization of these studios, meaning they haven't had much time to put together their first-party games. The decision from Google has left many questioning why, though the Stadia team has offered little in reply. One apparent reason, according to reporting from a Stadia internal Q&A, was Bethesda. This past Thursday, Google Stadia GM Phil Harrison did a Q&A with Stadia staff regarding the decision to shut down Stadia's game development teams. Kotaku has reported on some of Harrison's responses. While Harrison was said to be very coy regarding the reasons for the decision, one specific thing he mentioned was Microsoft's ongoing acquisition of ZeniMax Media, which includes Bethesda, ID Software, Machine Games, and other subsidiaries. How Microsoft's Bethesda acquisition factored into Stadia's game development efforts wasn't explained, it seems. All Harrison is reported to have said is that Microsoft's acquisition of Bethesda and its ongoing buying spree of other studios was a factor in Stadia's decision. Kotaku doesn't provide any further context for Harrison's response. It doesn't even provide a direct quote. Yet if Harrison was willing to say it, then it must have been important. A key detail to acknowledge is that Microsoft's xCloud game streaming service is perhaps Google's biggest competition for Google Stadia. While Google Stadia wasn't explicitly creating games to offer a competitive selection of exclusives, it's almost certainly a factor. As for how Microsoft's acquisitions played into this competition between the companies, one can only guess. Perhaps Google was also pursuing the ZeniMax Media/Bethesda acquisition and missing out severely impacted its plans for first-party game development. Perhaps the Bethesda acquisition made Google believe it couldn't compete based on exclusive games. Or perhaps Google believed getting Bethesda itself was the only way to bring its in-house game development to a level of success worth supporting. Whatever the reason, Google has already pulled the plug on its Stadia game development teams. There's no reversing course now. And what that decision means for the future of Google Stadia and cloud gaming in general remains to be seen. But at the very least, there are now hundreds of former Stadia developers with uncertain futures who believed Google and Stadia would be there for them. The entire situation is unfortunate. It's important to understand why digital gaming continues to grow before understanding the pitfalls illustrated by Stadia. The format's benefits go beyond that of simply being more convenient than physical copies. Digital games avoid issues like damaged discs that longtime gamers will be familiar with. Digital publishing is also partly responsible for the current renaissance of indie game developers, which may lack the resources for physical distribution. There's also a sustainability factor involved with digital games. It seems like a non-issue, but in a world that is moving away from packaging waste and emissions, it only makes sense that the video game industry keeps up with these changes. While there are many issues with digital gaming overall, there are some key ones to think about when it comes to the specific issue of a service like Stadia ending. One of the most significant issue at hand here is that of ownership of digital video games. Digital gaming has diluted what it means to own games, with many consumers unaware of the changes that have taken place over the past few years. As it stands, most digital downloads do not actually infer ownership to the buyer, but rather give them access to it with the permission of the publisher. The shutdown of Stadia exemplifies that this situation is even more precarious with cloud gaming, since the purchase is for access through the cloud platform, rather than directly to the game itself. There is rarely any reason for a publisher to rescind access to purchased games, but this shutdown shows that a cloud provider like Google could more realistically do so. Effectively, access to a purchased game through a cloud service requires permission, so to speak, from both the publisher and the streaming provider, and with the latter gone, many consumers will be losing games they likely thought they owned outright. Ownership has been discussed a lot since the move towards digital gaming started, but it's been easy to ignore for many. The fact is that there have seldom been cases where the end of availability of titles or even entire stores has resulted in the wholesale loss of the ability to play games. Even things like the approaching closure of the Nintendo eShop for 3DS and Wii U will still allow players still keep their downloaded games and add-on content. That isn't the case here. While refunds are a welcome compromise, people who chose to use Stadia as their only gaming platform will lose their entire access to the medium when the service closes down in January. One such individual is a YouTuber, who said that they are seriously pissed off at the Google Stadia shutdown because it means he will lose access to his 907-hour save file in Red Dead Redemption 2. He has called on Rockstar Games to allow a one-time character transfer so they can bring their Red Dead Redemption 2 multiplayer character to another platform. While it may have been possible to figure out a way to get their single-player save data into the PC version of Red Dead Redemption 2, Tequila Works has confirmed that its Stadia exclusive horror title GYLT will be coming to other platforms sometime next year. The shutdown of Stadia also brings forth another recurring issue that continues to grow in relevance: video game preservation. In some ways, digitization of gaming has aided preservation. This is another area where the unique characteristics of cloud services like Stadia present even more issues than digital downloads. A perfect illustration of this comes from the now infamous case of PT, a playable teaser to the cancelled Silent Hills game from Hideo Kojima. The teaser was removed from the PlayStation Store when Konami cancelled Silent Hills but remained playable to those who had already downloaded it. It also later became more widely available through fan remakes based on the original, though these projects faced legal issues. Most of the games in Stadia's library are available through other platforms, but there are some exclusives on the service. That means those games could effectively disappear if there are not some measures of preservation put in place. As it stands, the list of Stadia exclusives is short, consisting mostly of indie games like Outcasters and GYLT, but that by no means suggests these games aren't worth preserving. Video game preservation is important because of the cultural contribution gaming makes through all games, not just ones deemed important by certain people. As such, the loss of any part of this history is one worth grieving. Any games that vanish with Stadia will add to its complicated legacy as an early face of cloud gaming. Cloud gaming has a surprisingly long history in the video game landscape, with its first uses dating all the way back to 2003 and the G cluster. An extremely primitive attempt to offer streaming-based games and video on demand. In the decade that followed, cloud gaming went dormant, only rearing its head once again in 2010 with OnLive, a fairly competent game streaming service that never managed to turn a profit, and subsequently shut down in 2012. But not before granting some of its technology rights to PlayStation for its PS Now service. Since then, Nvidia has been the biggest voice in the cloud gaming landscape, with its Nvidia GeForce Now subscription service beginning life back in 2013 as Nvidia Grid. While Nvidia's foray into cloud gaming has been fairly successful, it's lacked the funding to really elevate the medium to the mainstream, something which Google sought to do. In 2019, Google Stadia launched, and of all the attempts at cloud gaming so far, Stadia had the most promise. With enough money for some substantial servers, the pipe dream of cloud gaming finally seemed like it could be a reality, and for some early adopters, it was. Though the library was sparse when it released, Stadia's performance was surprisingly good according to early critics, but that soon changed when the general public got their hands on it. Cloud gaming is quite a niche product. Which is ironic considering that the purpose of a gaming streaming service is to get games in the hands of casual audiences that don't want to spend a lot of money on one console. So, Google had a hard time trying to convince the gaming public that Stadia was a worthwhile investment. Marketing Stadia to hardcore gamers didn't make any sense, as they already own a PC or console. And marketing to casual gamers didn't get Stadia far, as cloud gaming is still a bit of a confusing concept for the mass market. Over the last year or so, Google Stadia has stagnated. With no new players, there's no continuous stream of revenue, and with no money, there's no reason to host expensive servers. Google Stadia shutting down just 3 years after its launch is not a good sign for the future of cloud gaming. This announcement essentially tells the gaming industry that even a juggernaut company like Google can't make cloud gaming a financially viable product, or at least not yet. Maybe this time more of an emphasis will be placed on marketing it to a specific audience. Whether that's hardcore gamers that want to take their AAA gaming experience on the go, or the casual market that is looking for a dirt cheap gaming experience.
I can see it. How did we miss this? Exactly. The Council will be furious. Although they should know by now not to underestimate human defiance. Perhaps was the most endearing trait.
BioWare recently released about 30 seconds of teaser footage for the new Mass Effect game on N7 Day, which had distorted dialogue but did show what appears to be the construction of a mass relay. And one fan has managed to crack the dialogue. It suggests that whatever humanity is doing, it does so in defiance of the new Mass Effect Games Council. How exactly a reconstruction of a mass relay, which could also theoretically be a supermass relay to connect the Milky Way and Andromeda galaxies, or something more sinister, is done so in defiance. It doesn't bode well that the reconstruction seems to be led by Cerberus. It's possible that this technology is being built with leftover Reaper tech, given Mass Effect 3's destroy ending, and that would make sense. Control and/or use of these resources would likely be heavily regulated. It seems to be taking place between an unknown alien race not speaking common, or via another transmission, and Liara. The ending is definitely foreboding for the next game. As Liara at Sony, speaking of the council, states that they should know by now not to underestimate human defiance. Gamble also retweeted this line, hinting at Liara's titles of Doctor, Shadow Broker, and Liara has played a big role in Mass Effect 4's marketing so far and will likely continue to do so. Of course, such a teaser opens the door to tinfoil hat territory, and a lot of the language here could hint at something more. First off, the official Mass Effect Twitter thanks its agents for decoding the transmission, suggesting that whatever faction the new player begins as part of, it's likely whatever features these agents. Now, the construction is being recorded by another ship with a Quarian captain, likely meaning that these agents are watching over humanity. If not more of the galaxy's folks, somehow following the destruction of the mass relays, Liara may somehow be part of that, hence the redacted title. Players will likely begin the new game as one of these agents, joining Liara in some form of a quest. Now, BioWare is doing everything it can to paint the construction of this mass relay in a bad light, Cerberus involvement, Liara's dialogue, with this Mass Effect 4 footage. But it'll be impressive to see if this is a red herring. A fragmented Milky Way galaxy potentially controlled by a fearful, powerful new council would be a nice direction to encourage defiance. It's not likely to be the title, but Mass Effect Defiance has a nice ring to it. The Mass Effect trilogy holds a special place in the hearts of many gamers. While Mass Effect 3 was controversial, and 2017's Mass Effect Andromeda launched in an unfortunate state, the franchise nevertheless continues to have an active following 15 years after the original game's release. Many fans were thus excited, if perhaps a little nervous, when BioWare announced Mass Effect 4 last year. BioWare has been pretty quiet about Mass Effect 4 since the announcement, with the most recent teaser only showing a mass relay under construction and some cryptic lines from returning character Liara. As a result, fans don't know much about the upcoming game, though the teaser trailer seems to imply that Shepard chose to destroy the Reapers at the end of Mass Effect 3. If that's the case, it would be an excellent opportunity for Mass Effect 4 to explore the themes of a post-apocalyptic galaxy. Mass Effect 3 lets players choose between up to 4 endings depending on their actions throughout the trilogy. Each outcome radically alters the Milky Way galaxy, potentially turning all its inhabitants into cyborgs, making Shepard the Reaper's overlord, or allowing the Reapers to exterminate all advanced civilizations. However, many believe that Mass Effect 4 takes place after ME3's Destroy ending, where Shepard uses the Crucible to destroy the Reapers rather than control them or remove the Reapers' reason to exist. Players can and have made arguments for and against all of the trilogy's endings. However, Mass Effect 3's Destroy ending has a lot of adverse effects, such as the destruction of all artificial intelligence, including the Geth and Shepard's AI squad member EDI. It also shows the Citadel exploding and breaking apart after the Crucible fires, whereas it only appears to be damaged in the Synthesis ending and remains fully operational in Control. Similarly, the mass relays are left severely damaged in all 3 of the trilogy's primary endings, possibly bringing the entire network offline. However, Destroy is the only ending where the galaxy is forced to repair them without the Reaper's help. It's also the only one of Mass Effect 3's endings where the narrator, in this case Admiral Hackett, specifically mentions the damage to the relays. BioWare has never come out and said which ending is canon. However, the Mass Effect 4 announcement trailer all but confirms that the game takes place after Mass Effect 3's Destroy ending, depicting the Citadel broken and abandoned in a field of debris. While Mass Effect 3's Destroy ending shows that it is eventually rebuilt, that clearly hasn't happened yet. Since the ending slides don't give any indication of how much time has passed, it could be years or decades before the Milky Way fully recovers. The Twitter teaser shows that some rebuilding is underway, but we don't know how far along that progress is. That covers the damage caused by firing the Crucible in ME3 but doesn't even touch on what the Reapers were doing throughout the game. London is in ruins when players go there during Mass Effect 3, and there's no reason to believe that Earth's other major cities fared much better. Meanwhile, the Turian capital of Palaven doesn't seem to be doing much better, and the Asari homeworld of Thesha also came under direct assault. As for the political consequences, the Batarian hegemony doesn't seem to exist anymore. Meanwhile, the Reapers effectively wiped out the Alliance's civilian government in the opening hours of the invasion. Between that and the likely need to replace the entire Citadel Council, and the galaxy is left with 3 major political crises to deal with at once. Mass Effect 4 wouldn't be post-apocalyptic in the strictest sense, but it's easy to imagine various planets existing on something of a spectrum. Some worlds might be much the same as before the war. Others might resemble the nuclear-blasted Krogan homeworld of Tachenka or the dust-choked ruins of Pharos, while most will probably fall between those extremes. Some of these communities might receive support from whatever interstellar governments remain. Others would probably be on their own, leaving the people to scrounge through the wreckage for survival. Even worlds that escaped without severe damage might suddenly find themselves cut off from the rest of civilization. That's not even getting to the colonies that might not even exist after the war. Some recently settled planets have been evacuated, while the Reaper assault completely wiped others out. These worlds would be littered with overgrown bombed-out ruins inhabited by pirates and scavengers. There might even be room for some Mad Max or Fallout-style lawless wastelands on the fringes of galactic civilization. However, the possibility of having planets with post-apocalyptic elements isn't what makes Mass Effect 4 interesting. Again, the Mass Effect series already did that with Pharos and Tachenka. Instead, it's the potential for how the game could apply post-apocalyptic themes and motifs to the galaxy at large. There's plenty of potential in cranking Mass Effect 2's terminus systems up to 11, spreading across most of the galaxy, with pirates and warlords battling for control over vast stretches of former Citadel space. Meanwhile, remote colonies would struggle to eke out a modest existence in the shadow of wrecked starships and shattered megastructures. Overall, the visual motifs of Mass Effect 4 should emphasize the ideas of an advanced and once powerful civilization going through a dark age. In a way, one could even compare it to the atmosphere of games like Elden Ring, whose environment design captures a similar feeling. Mass Effect 4's galaxy probably wouldn't be as far gone as Elden Ring's, of course, but that example expresses the concept well enough. That also doesn't mean Mass Effect 4 should lean so far into the aesthetic that it's bleak and hopeless. On the contrary, Mass Effect's story has always been optimistic, and such a radical change in tone would be antithetical to the series' values. However, optimism isn't mutually exclusive with post-apocalyptic themes, and the idea that things are bad now, but they were worse and will get better fits perfectly well with the game's ethos. That, more than anything, is the feeling that Mass Effect 4 needs to capture. And that's all for the video, guys. Like and share the video for a greater audience. Comment your thoughts on the topics, and donations are always appreciated. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon, and until then, from SMPV, it's goodbye.